The honourable member for Nanaimo, Ladysmith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to pursue my concern that the cost of childcare in this country is punitive for families and detrimental to women's economic justice in this country. Fees are more than $1,200 a month in Toronto. For my little sister, the cost of childcare is more than the cost of rent, $1,400 in Vancouver. This past week, the OECD was here on Parliament Hill investigating Canada's commitment to its feminist agenda and its gender lens on its policies and budget processes. The OECD has observed that affordability and quality in childcare overall in Canada is still an issue, forcing many women to drop out of the labour market or reduce their working hours during childbearing years. This affects women's earning levels. Full-time employed women in Canada earn on average 19% less than men, end quote. That was reflected also by a study that the OECD did of Canadian families. That the report found that families in Canada spend almost 1/4 of their income on childcare, a ratio that is much higher than in other parts of the world, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development says. It found that Canada is among the most expensive for childcare amongst its 35 members. This was reinforced for me meeting last week in the riding with James Brierley, who's the BC Young Worker Coordinator for the Public Service Alliance of Canada. He said monies currently allocated in the 2017 federal budget are not sufficient, and as we both know, a national universal childcare system that provides affordable quality childcare to all families in Canada and to pay early childhood educators a living wage will take increased federal funding. He noted his own personal story. He says, this is again James Brierley quoted, "With another child due in January, these costs are set to rise to $1,770 per month for 2 children. I've had to discuss with my wife if we can afford the family we always wanted, thanks to a system that commoditizes childcare in the market environment. As a family that works decent government jobs with a household income of over $120,000 per year, this was not something I'd anticipated to be an issue. Over 55% of our household income will be allocated to childcare and housing costs. When will we have a childcare system that will be the envy of the world, as the Liberal government is so proud to say Canada is the envy of the world? BC numbers are close to the top for child poverty. It's time for this federal government to take a stand on childcare and stand up for working Canadians." End quote. This lines up also with a TD Bank study saying that investing in early childhood education programs would help Canada address major economic threats it's facing over the coming decades, and that the program could pay for itself. And so I ask the government once again, when will it heed the advice of the OECD, the TD Bank, families across the country, and invest what the IMF says? If you put in $8 billion a year, the program would pay for itself in taxation and additional economic activity, as well as being a just thing for families and women in our country.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development.
Thank you. I hope the title doesn't eat into my speaking time. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to start by thanking the Honourable Member for Nanaimo Ladysmith for raising this important issue in the House and focusing on childcare. It's a critical issue for many communities across the country. I'd also like to apologize that my voice may disappear in the middle of this answer, and that's not because I don't care about the issue as well, but just because I'm nursing a bit of a cold right now. We know that childcare is important. In fact, we understand that many families in this country lack affordable, high-quality, regulated childcare, and we know that this forces many families into making hard choices. Some parents are forced to stay at home because they simply can't afford to pay childcare, while others are working more than one job to make ends meet. For
too many families, the absence of affordable services of high quality means difficult choices. Certain parents have to leave their career because they don't have the means to pay for childcare, while others have to deal with a job have to have a job in order to make ends meet.
Make these tough choices, and our government is committed to making sure that Canadians have to make them less and less. Our government recognizes that quality child care and early learning support during early years is critical to a child's social, emotional, cognitive development and participation in society later on. And that's why in our first budget, a year ago in 2016, our government proposed to invest $500 million immediately into early learning and child care, including $100 million specifically targeted to Indigenous learning child care, which will be led, designed, and delivered by Indigenous communities. But that was just a start. This year, in Budget 2017, we proposed and invested an additional $7 billion over 10 years to support and create more high-quality, flexible, inclusive, and affordable childcare right across the country. And we're making it happen. In fact, on June 12th, the federal government, along with provincial territorial partners and the ministers responsible for early learning childcare across the country, announced a multilateral early learning childcare framework, and that has been put into place. This new framework sets the foundation for governments to work towards the long-shared goal of making sure that children, no matter where they are across Canada, can experience the enriching environment of quality learning and early child care. We have done more than that, though, because since then, 3 provinces and 1 territory have entered into 3 bilateral agreements, and in the coming weeks and months, we will continue to work with the remaining provincial and territorial partners with a total of $1.2 billion to be allocated, addressing each jurisdiction's unique early learning and child care needs based on the systems that's present in different regions and provinces across this country. We're going to develop an action plan together with the provinces and territories to track progress, ensure low and middle income families increasingly have more access to affordable child care. The framework will complement the development of a separate Indigenous early learning and child care framework between our government and Indigenous partners that will reflect the unique cultural needs of Métis Nation, Inuit, and First Nations children right across the country. We are also investing another $95 million to close the data gap to make sure we have accurate assessments, not just in terms of what we're doing across the country, but to make sure that we set new standards and achieve those new standards, and we'll be tracking that progress through the life of the agreements we've signed. We're also investing $100 million into early learning and childcare innovation so we can find new ways to support children as they move through the early years to make sure it's not just child minding, but it's childcare and learning development that takes place. We're working closely with provinces and territories right across this country to make sure that Canadians and children in this country get the support they need, and we'll continue to work with the parties opposite to make sure we get those programs delivered. Thank you.
The honourable member for Nanaimo, Ladysmith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the concern that we have, given the tremendous backlog and the evidence we have, we know how much this harms economic well-being for women and how ultimately this harms the economy. So the International Monetary Fund recommended an expenditure of $8 billion a year on childcare. That would be good for the economy, and through increased workforce participation and taxation, it would pay for itself. The Library of Parliament has calculated that that this government at this point has only committed 8.8% of that funding. So that's a 91.2% funding shortfall compared to what the IMF recommended this country spend. The budget 2017 does not allocate funding for any new childcare spaces until 2018-2019. And as the member says, with 2 provinces, British Columbia and Alberta, being absolutely ready to go with construction of new childcare spaces and supporting childcare workers, we need a government that's willing to make the significant investment early on to create those new spaces and to get women to work and to get childcare workers with secure spending.
The honourable parliamentary secretary.
The member opposite would know that one of the challenges we face as a federal government is that when we put new dollars into a program, quite often provinces, and the NDP in Alberta is a fine example, takes money out the back door, and so we don't end up increasing expenditures on childcare. So we needed to sign comprehensive agreements with the provinces before the dollars could roll. We have done that now, and that's why this program is going to add, as I said, an additional $7 billion into the daycare system over the next few years. The member opposite cites studies that say that the national spending level should be at a certain amount, and then assumes that the federal government should be 100% responsible for that. As we know, under the Constitution, under the service delivery model we have in this country, the $7 billion that we've put in, or the 9% that she references, is only part of the national expenditure. She's identified the federal government's expenditure, but the provinces and the cities also contribute to that and get us much closer to the amount, and she should calculate that as she does the addition. But if the member opposite, in particular the NDP, was serious about childcare, my question to them would be, why, when we had a national childcare agreement, fully funded, with all of the provinces, moving towards a universal system of accessible, regulated childcare and living, why would they have defeated the government at the cusp of that coming into existence? If they really cared about children, why wouldn't they have delayed that vote by a matter of 2 weeks? 2 weeks is all it would have taken, and we'd have had 10 years of solid investment and a solid program across the country. They put their electoral fortunes ahead of the plight of children in the city, and I will not be lectured to by the New Democrats